Hey guys, welcome back to Fireside Podcast. We're so excited to jump into today's conversation. My name is Abby and I'm here with my co-host Jordyn. And this morning we have a special guest who I'm very excited about, my really good friend Elizabeth Castillo. And before we jump into today's conversation, I want to open up. We were talking about spiritual gifts a couple of weeks ago, and one of Elizabeth's spiritual gifts, and I can't remember if we've had this conversation before or not, but we probably have. But your spiritual gift is wisdom. And there have been so many different times that we've had a conversation together, and I, days before, was praying, God, I need wisdom in this situation. I don't know what I'm doing. And then you and I will talk, and in that moment, that's God's response to my prayer for wisdom. And that happens over and over again. And it just clicked the other day that that's how God answers my prayers oftentimes, is he'll put people in my path that say something that answers the question that I was having. And it kind of blew my mind the other day. But that's the kind of relationship that I have with Elizabeth. And it's an incredible relationship. And I'm so grateful for it. And this morning, you guys get to have a sneak peek into just a little bit of that wisdom that I get to enjoy on a regular basis. So,
wow, Abby, that was
there's your setup for today.
That was quite the setup. Now I'm sweating.
Yeah.
But I mean, here's the reality. The reality is that wisdom comes from God. Oftentimes we're in a situation where we're unsure, right? And we're unclear, and people are just running around and in a panic and in an anxiety attack. And the reality is that the Bible is super clear all across the Bible, right? Proverbs, James, so many times that God says, listen, wisdom comes from me, right? Mm-hmm. And the beginning of that knowledge starts with the Lord. And we see that in Proverbs, we see that in James. And so I just wanted to share with you all a little bit about, and excuse my y'alls, I just spent some time with my brother in the South, and that's probably going to come out in this particular podcast. So I apologize in advance because I'm a California girl. But we're going to talk about tough conversations today, especially tough conversations as it comes in the workforce. Oftentimes, difficult conversations are avoided, or they're you take them head on because you're one of those people that are like, I'm the boss, I'm doing it this way, and this is how it's happening, right? Mm-hmm. But we're going to talk a little bit about difficult conversations, how to have those, and what that looks like. We're currently in 2022, so if you have any semblance of what's happening currently right now, we have a recession looming, we have a lot of economic uncertainty. We have some leaders out there in the workforce that will remain unnamed that are, doing layoffs and doing all of these things. But the way that they're doing it is very hurtful. It doesn't put people first. And so we're going to talk about that. But I think that some of these principles of having difficult conversations extend beyond the workplace. They can extend into our friendships, into our families, because the reality is that oftentimes we try to stay away from difficult conversations. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so easy to get into that avoiding mode, and that never ends well because it's got to happen eventually. But
for sure.
But
definitely.
even with the stress of life and work and these looming difficult conversations, like that's no excuse to not treat people kindly and with a love that comes from God.
Absolutely. And there are ways to have difficult conversations that you can be successful in. So I'm going to ask you and Jordyn, when you think about a difficult conversation on a scale from 1 to 10, what would you say is your ability to have those difficult conversations? Are you like a 10, you're fantastic, you've got them mastered, or you're a 1, you're just like, nope, not happening?
I think that's tough. I am an avoider. I love to avoid conflict, and that doesn't work very well, especially like in more management positions. But I'd say most of the time I avoid. So I'm pretty low on that scale. I'd probably be like a 2 or a 3. Every so often I have those moments where I'm like, well, I just need to girl boss and go have that conversation. So occasionally there'll be like an outlier, but I'm pretty low on that scale.
Jordyn, what about you?
Generally, I run, I think, kind of in the middle. I'm a people pleaser by nature, and so thus I can go out of my way to avoid things. But I think just over time, I've seen the value in those conversations more and more and more, and like the compounding interest of like, if there's a tough conversation to be had and once you have it, everything gets better. Things get better. Things unfold. The healing process begins. If it's that kind of hard conversation, things begin to develop once that hard conversation is had. That doesn't happen until that happens. So to like put a numerical number, like I range from a 4 to like a 6, where it's like, I don't really want to have this conversation. And then it's like, no, as a leader, I need to have this conversation. Let's go have the conversation.
Well, and when you are a leader, this isn't just a personal, this is affecting you and one other person. When this is affecting so many other people, like you have to take that in consideration, because having that tough conversation is a way of loving the other people that are being affected by the outcome of what is happening between you and one person. So I've noticed just in leadership in a church, it's like there's so many more people involved in having that conversation than just you and that one person that you're physically having that conversation with.
Definitely. I really loved what you said, Jordyn, of let the healing begin, right? Because if there's a difficult conversation to be had, there is an issue, right? And how do we get to the bottom of it? And how do we start that healing process? Or in leadership, in the workforce, we don't call it healing, we call it that growth. Right? There's always going to be some growth from these difficult conversations. And if you look at a conversation of, hey, I'm not just like calling you out on all the stuff that's happening or like your poor performance. I'm calling you out because I want you to grow. I see potential in you. And I want that healing to start. And I want you to grow from this and grow into the next step. That's really going to be super powerful as a leader, not just in the church, but in the workforce, in your families and things of that nature. I really love Proverbs 1:5. Proverbs 1:5 says, and I'm reading out of the NIV just because it's just more relatable, I guess, in translation. It says, let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. It doesn't say let the unwise. It says let the wise listen, right? So if you are a leader and you're one of those leaders that says, hey, I hear this phrase all the time. I've been in business 20 years. I've been through it all. And somehow that means that you don't have to learn anything else. I got to tell you, Proverbs 1:5 is going to disagree. It says, let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. It means that smart people ask for help. It means that smart people sit back, and when there has to be that tough conversation, they don't keep it to themselves, right? They include others. They include others that are going to give them wise guidance. You're not just going to go to some random person and be like, what do you think about this? You don't have any experience, but tell me what you think. You're going to find that wise counsel. So one of the things I was really thinking about is why do you think that we avoid difficult conversations?
Oh, you're worried that people's view of yourself is going to change or be harmed?
Yeah, definitely.
Or that you're going to break this relationship with this person so bad. And yeah,
I think we see a lot, the dramatized version of most conversations that are like communicated to us. They're tough conversations. Tough conversation, like, as we see them a lot of times, is like, oh, you're firing somebody. Oh, you're, whatever that conversation is. But it's usually big and life changing. And as people that care, as leaders, you tend to care about people. So you go like, how is this going to impact them, their family, our team, the people around us? And so there's this big, I guess, stirring pot. And it's like, okay, I have to walk in and stir the pot. So like, it's like, am I ready to do that? Like, am I going to be able to do that well? And then like, how do I accept the consequences, good or bad, of that when that happens?
I think we all danced around what it boils down to, right? If it boils down to one word, it's fear of emotions.
Yes.
It's fear of their emotions, and it's also fear of our emotions. Like, how am I going to handle their emotions? I think that's what you were kind of alluding to there, Jordyn, is how if they start crying because I'm making this life-altering decision for their life, how am I going to handle that? And I think Abby said it earlier where she was like, listen, I prefer to avoid things. There are two camps, right? The avoiders and the one that's going to be the aggressive person and is not going to care and they're just going to like go for it, right? So when you boil down that difficult conversation to that topic of emotions, how does that make you feel?
I think it becomes very selfish, right? Because we're standing in the way of progress. We're standing in the way of them. Because if something's not working, someone's underperforming, and they're getting let go. That's kind of the example we kind of keep running with, or maybe just me. But it's because something's not working. There's something that needs to change. There's development. There's growth that needs to happen. Mm-hmm. And I totally just lost my train of thought.
That's okay. But you made me think. Sometimes it's just easy to live in that comfortable place where I don't have to deal with the situation. And if I don't deal with it, then my life just goes on and I stay comfortable. And again, that just goes back to that avoiding thing and avoiding emotions and stuff. But there's that fear of I have to change and I can't just be comfortable anymore. And it's so much easier to stay in that place of I'm comfortable, so I'm going to keep going, even if that's hurting other people. I don't know. It's just easier to live in that place than it is to deal with emotions.
Sure, definitely. If you look up the word emotions, I'm a big proponent of I like to look up at the dictionary, and I know that if you're a millennial or a Gen Zer, you're like, I don't know what a dictionary looks like. So go to the library. There's going to be a big giant dictionary in there with words. But if not, you can also pull up Google and just hit define. And if you define the word emotions, one of its definitions is disturbance. Mm. And if you think about a disturbance, if you think about Star Wars and the phrase disturbance in the force or any of those things, right? You can visualize what that looks like, what emotions does to you, right? It's just this chaotic, unsettled feeling that's happening. And I think that oftentimes as leaders, that's why we fear difficult conversations, because there is a disturbance in the force. And either the person that you're going to deliver the message to is going to be disturbed or you are going to be disturbed, because it's like Abby mentioned earlier, it's sometimes it's just easier to avoid. But one of the challenges of avoiding these difficult conversations, especially in the workforce, or even in a church for that matter, is that there is a big impact if difficult conversations are avoided, right? Mm-hmm. There could be, it could be as serious as a lawsuit in the workplace. It could be as serious as losing customers or people coming to church. It could be as serious as losing relationships. It could be a strong business impact that happens when you avoid these difficult conversations. So, I think it's important to have some tools as you get ready to have these difficult conversations. And I consistently listen to thought leaders and read books and things of that nature. And she had this concept. When you're getting ready to talk to somebody, and it really resonated for me, especially as a Christian woman in tech in the workforce. She had this concept that how you see yourself plus how you see others and your intentions equals your behavior.
Say that again.
How you see yourself plus how you see others plus your intentions equals your behavior. So here's the deal. For us as believers, as Jesus followers, that's pretty powerful, right? Because how do we see others? How should we see others?
Mm-hmm. Well, we should love them the way that God has loved him.
Yeah. We've learned so many times, right, that they're the image of God.
Love God and love people. Absolutely.
Right. That's how we should see others. But that also applies to us and how we see ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I think that for leaders sometimes is a difficult thing. If you're someone that's timid or new or growing in leadership, sometimes you see yourself as not equipped. That you don't have enough of the resources or skills or talents to have these difficult conversations. But if we think about that verse of asking for wisdom, in Proverbs, it says the beginning of wisdom of knowledge is God. And if we're asking him for that wisdom and that knowledge, he's going to give it to us. So if you take that equation of how you see ourselves and how you see others, okay, so we know that. Mm-hmm. And where do our intentions come from? For us as Jesus followers, our intentions should be where? Our intentions should be coming from like 1 Corinthians 13, right? That tell us specifically how to love other people, that we put others first, mm-hmm. that we forgive, that we have this idea that we are going to continue to grow people, right? Mm-hmm. I had this verse set aside. Ephesians 4:15 says, instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ Jesus, right? That is us speaking to others with truth. That is our intention of not trying to hurt them, but we're trying to grow them, especially when we're in that workplace. And mm-hmm. those three things of how we see others, how we see ourselves, and then our intentions is going to equal our behavior. We're going to see it as a leader. We're going to see the way that we interact with others in very specific ways. It's really going to have to start to grow the way that we interact with others in those difficult conversations.
Yeah, having those three things all line up well, though, is no easy task.
No, most definitely. But I think that the way that you can get back to that in very practical ways in leadership is really mapping out your conversation. Mm. Right? If you're like Jordyn, you do worship and you play. would you ever just go in cold without practicing at least a little bit?
No. Okay, let's put it this way. Ideally, no. If I can control it, no. Right.
But you've probably, not even like formally practicing. You're probably practicing strumming at home and like thinking about things and doing stuff, right?
Sure. Mental prep. Absolutely. Doing they call them mental reps, like in sports, like, I'm thinking through the process. Things like that.
For sure. Definitely. And Abby, we spent a lot of time, you're, graphic designer extraordinaire. You've taken classes, right? You've gone to prepare yourself, right? Mm-hmm. In order to be where you are in your career as a creative director, right? Of preparing yourself, right? So in any circumstance in life, you have to prep. Mm-hmm. And so when you're going to have these difficult conversations, it's so important to prep. Right? I can tell you, I don't know. Have you guys had a difficult conversation without prep? How did that go?
Yes, and poorly.
Poorly, right?
Because I gave in to the moment of them wanting to have that conversation right then because they were frustrated, and it turned into a really, it really was a toxic interaction. Because it was aggression and then met with defensive without any mm-hmm. prep. So all of a sudden, there's an emotional response instead of a logical response to what's going on. And it went very poorly. Absolutely.
Sure, definitely. I can remember just this past week, I had a difficult conversation. And I'm sitting in the conversation and I'm like, Elizabeth, stop talking. Just stop. This is neither the time nor the place to have this conversation. You haven't thought it through. And even though my intentions were coming from a really, really great spot, because it wasn't the time or the place and I hadn't prepped, it just came out like a jumbled mess. And the message could have been so much clearer. It could have been, and not that the message wasn't received well, but it could have been so much clearer. I could have started from a place of like, hey, this is why I'm giving you this feedback. Because of X, Y, and Z, right? And they could have taken the conversation in a much better way. Instead, I had a conversation in a random spot, and I was like, yeah, probably not the best the best place to have this difficult conversation. What about you, Abby?
Difficult conversations?
Yeah, how do they go when you don't prep for them?
I think Jordyn hit it. It's you get into this defensive mentality, and no conversation is going to go well if that is where you are, because all of a sudden you lose your self-confidence and you see the other person as the enemy, and your intention is to just save yourself. And so all of those things that you mentioned are wrong. All of those those intentions are wrong. How you saw that other person is wrong. How you see yourself is wrong. And so the outcome is not going to be pretty. And it's so easy to fall into that defensive mode. Yeah. How do you take on those difficult conversations? Because they do happen randomly sometimes. How do you take on those difficult conversations in that moment and not have it go poorly? Like,
Sure.
when they come out of left field and you're like, I do have to deal with this to some extent. What is your advice for those types of conversations?
Yeah, definitely. I would say be prepared and in your mind, practice, right? Practice really helps you have these difficult conversations. So there are some things that I would recommend, such as letting the person know that you would like to talk to them, about something, about a concern, and start with the I statements. I think that we hear that oftentimes, right? And just in communication in general, is those I statements. I perceive, I have noticed. This isn't about you, because the minute you say you or you should do this or you've been doing this, you have lost the conversation, right? So start with those I have perceived statements, I have noticed. And then really move on to describe to me a little bit about what is going on, right? So why is this happening? And you really give the opportunity to the other person to take the stage and give you their reasons. Now, here, listen, there's going to probably be a lot of emotion, especially if you're coming at them with some difficult feedback, right? If they maybe they're not, their job performance isn't great. If they haven't come to work for 3 days, there's going to be excuses. There's going to be reasons. But you have to be prepared. Know that you can't come into that conversation blind and being like, oh, it's just going to be a unicorn and rainbow conversation, even though I'm giving this difficult feedback, right? Be prepared that there will be some pushback, but at least you're giving them the opportunity to share. And when they've given their whys, you can go back and say, so what I heard, and play back to them what you heard them say, and give them an opportunity to clarify. So once that has happened, you can say, well, I appreciate that you've shared with me your side or your perspective or what is happening that is causing this behavior. So let me talk to you a little bit about what I would like to do. Right? So you lay out your plan of what you would like to happen. You'd like for them to be on time. You'd like for them to turn in their work. You'd like for them to communicate a little bit better, in a meeting. Whatever it is that you're trying to get them to achieve, of saying, I've heard what you had to say. This is how we're going to move forward and correct it. And then you throw it over to them again and you say, what are your thoughts about that plan? Right? And you're going to have a dialogue. There's going to be pushback. There's going to be resistance, especially if the person just doesn't want to do it. Like if you have, there are going to be those like extreme edge cases where people are like, nope, not happening. I'm not doing it. Right? But 9 times out of 10, people want to do better. I mean, would you agree with me that like when someone brings feedback to you, you're like, yeah, I know it's something that I'm missing. I know it's something that's a fault and I want to do better. Right? So if you position yourself as saying, listen, I want to help you grow. I want to help you overcome this challenge that we're currently seeing right now. It's going to help to change the mindset and the tone of that conversation. But you as a leader need to consistently position yourself in a way that you're there to help them grow. You're not pointing out how horrible and awful they are. That's not your role as a leader. Your role is to identify, listen, these are areas of opportunity right now, and this is how I'm prepared to support you, right? Once you've gotten to that point where you said, hey, this is what I'd like to do, and they've given you their feedback, then you have to decide on the steps to achieve that, right? And the accountability. And here's where a lot of leaders miss the point, where they say, I'm going to follow up, say I'm going to email you, or we're going to have a one-on-one, or we're going to touch base on this weekly for 15 minutes. It happens for the first 2-3 weeks. And then what happens?
And you forget.
You forget. Like life gets busy, the schedules change. It's just, one thing after another. It's the holiday season. People are out of the office. Whatever excuse happens, right? That the leader forgets that accountability piece. And then what happens to you as a leader is that you lose credibility with this person, right? They're not going to believe you that you're there to help them grow and develop. So that difficult conversation is important to help them grow and move into the next step. But for you as a leader, your important piece is that accountability piece. And that is difficult, right? But it's changing your behaviors as a leader that's going to help you guide that conversation, right? For me, I think the big thing as a leader is having a really solid mindset when you're coming into these difficult conversations of saying, am I going to fix this person? Am I going to fix the problem, or am I going to help them grow? If you're coming at it from a perspective of, I'm going to fix the person or I'm going to fix the problem, you might get some results. It really kind of depends on the person, right? You might get some short-term results, but it's not going to move the needle. What really is going to help you in these difficult conversations is to come from the mindset of growth. How am I helping this person grow? And that really puts you, that growth mindset really goes back to your intentions and your behaviors, right? Because if your intention is growth, the way that you deliver feedback will be a growth mindset. The way that you structure that person's time and day and their tasks will help them grow. And they'll see that you're really championing their growth, right? So I would say the other thing for us as leaders is you really want to set that expectation at the beginning of a conversation. If you have a new employee, or if you have a new employee that just joined your group, or a new volunteer, say, hey, one of the things that I like to do is I like to observe. This is when I lead people, this is how I come at it. I like to observe. So 9 times out of 10, if I, drop into your store, I'm observing. I'm just watching what's happening. I'm just looking to see what's going on. And if there's some areas that are going well, I'll give you that feedback of those areas that are going well, but I'll also give you the feedback in areas where maybe we need to point in a different direction and restructure. So really, if you start as a leader and you come at it from you're going to get feedback from me and you're going to get it regularly, they're going to be open to that feedback, and the feedback isn't going to be a surprise, right? Mm-hmm. Because oftentimes these difficult conversations are because like we said at the beginning, we avoided them. And now it's just this giant surprise. It's like a clown coming out of a box going, wow. Oh my God. Right? And we don't want that for people. I mean, I just don't think we want that in general in our life, right? And yeah, I mean, difficult conversations aren't fun, but they help us grow our relationships. And at the end of the day, that's who God made us. He made us these individuals that are going to build and grow relationships. And that growth in relationships really helps us to have an influence in the people around us. And at the end of the day, that's what we really want, right?
Okay, so what happens when you've had this conversation with somebody? They're like, yes, I'm ready to change. I'm ready to make these improvements. A couple months down the road, you have this conversation again because no improvements were made. And you're like, okay, these things need to be improved. And they're like, yeah, okay, I'm on board. I'm going to make some changes. And you follow up. You do all these things. You follow up with them. You help them be accountable, but you're not seeing growth in them. What's the next hard conversation that needs to happen? Or how do you help somebody grow that's showing you that they're not interested in growing?
Sure. I mean, that's the follow-up, right? But that's the great part is that you've kept them accountable. You've kept those touch points, and you're continuing not to see growth. At some point, you as a leader have to decide, okay, this is kind of that point where I need to really be a little bit more firm in my feedback to them. And then that's the next difficult conversation of saying, listen, we have been at this for a better part of half the year. We've been checking in regularly every month or every week, whatever the cadence is that you set. And we're still not seeing a change, in X, Y, and Z, whatever that change might be. So we're still not seeing a change. Tell me a little bit about why you think that is. Is this an area that you're still interested in, right? Because that might be it. They might be on board because they love you as a leader and they're so excited about your leadership and all the great things that you bring to the table. But at the end of the day, this might not be an area that they're excited about, or that they have giftedness in, or maybe they need additional tools, right? So you because you set that strong rapport of meeting with them and consistently giving them feedback, you can say, okay, we're still in the same spot. So what additional do you need from me so that we can get to here? Because within the next 2 months, that's when you start to put some strong milestones behind that, right? So within the next 2 months, I need you to be here. So what do you need from me so that you can be here? And if you're not here, I think that we need to really re-examine, is this the area that is best utilizing your strengths, right? Because sometimes people are in roles that maybe somebody left and they just picked up that role, or they were asked and they didn't know how to say no, and they're in that role. So you kind of have to boil down to why it's not working. And it's okay for them to say, and you can say this to them. It's okay for you to say, listen, I was passionate about this at one point, but I think I've lost my passion. I've lost my interest in this. I'm more interested in X, Y, and Z. Is there something that I can do in this area? Right? Mm-hmm. So I think that if you keep up that cadence of accountability, that next difficult conversation will be easier to do. Mm-hmm. Jordyn, felt like you wanted to say something.
Well, it's so interesting to me. I just love it. This conversation, it's steering them into taking ownership, which is something we've talked about on the podcast. And I know the staff here is tired of hearing me talk about Jocko Willink's book, and they're all sick and tired of it. But owning that, what these questions do is you're asking them, hey, how much ownership do you have in this? Because I see it looks like you're letting your car get kind of run down. Hey, the house is getting a little run down. How much do you own this? How much are you invested? Without saying, hey, the thing you're doing is bad. It's how invested are you? How much do you own this? How much do you love this? And I think that's really cool, because as a leader, that's showing how much you're invested. But then it turns it around and says, I'm asking you for that response of hey, where are you? Not in a aggressive kind of way, but just hey, tell me where you're at. Tell me where you want to be if this isn't where you want to be. And I don't know, just hearing that whole, that line of thinking just makes me just kind of go okay, we're helping them as leaders. When we have these conversations, we're helping them identify things in themselves. Some of those things that we talked about, some of their that self-image, how do they see themselves? Well, maybe they don't know. And as we ask these questions, they're going to discover, oh, I'm not passionate about that. And they might not even see it, especially if you work with young people. They're just running 1,000,000 miles a minute, trying to make $1 in the workforce, or if they're in ministry, they're trying to minister to everything that breathes. And it's I love it, love the energy. But then you have this conversation of hey, I see the area that we're asking you to serve in, work in, there seems to be a disconnect. And just by opening the door of it's not, oh, there's a consequence because we're opening this door. It's to avoid a long-term consequence. We got to walk through this door of hey, are you good? And I think that's what separates a good leader from a boss, or that mentality difference anyway, is fixing the problem versus helping the person. So
Jordyn, that was actually my last point that I had written down, was don't be the fixer. right? Because we can easily, and it has a lot to do with our personality as well. If you have a personality that's a fixer, you see a problem and you're like, solution, I got it. I'm good. I'm good. I can do it. You're not going to teach that person how to fish. And I know that is like an old idiom, give a man a fish, and, versus teaching him how to fish. But here's the deal. If you consistently give that employee or that volunteer the fish, they're never going to learn how to think for themselves. They're never going to find solutions for themselves. They're always going to run to you, and you're going to be the fixer. And there's just going to be this revolving door of your volunteers and your employees coming back and saying, hey, I've got a problem. I can't deal with this person, or I can't talk to this person, or I'm having trouble with this person. And you're like, listen, can you just maybe try and handle it on your own? But since you've put yourself in the middle of it and you're consistently fixing it, they're going to rely on you to fix that, right? And it really is that concept of ownership, of saying, okay, I'm sorry that you're having trouble with this person. Tell me a little bit about what's happening. What are the things that maybe you can do or that you can change? How do you think that maybe you can approach this person to shift that dynamic with them? And what does that look like, right? It really is about empowering your team to find solutions to some of those problems. But I wanted to circle back really quickly to the concept of that Abby kind of brought up. Say that you don't see change in somebody, right? Mm-hmm. Say that you've been a really diligent manager and you've stayed on this really strong cadence and you're checking in and there still isn't change. It really is about asking, like, is this an area that you're still excited about? And I would encourage leaders, whether you're at a large company or a small company, there are a lot of great tools out there that when you first put a team together, it would be great if you utilize some of those tools, such as the DISC test. It's DISC. And that really helps you and your team to understand your strengths and your opportunities for development. It helps you to see how people think, right? And then when you start to understand how others think, it really helps you to say, hey, if I approach this person this way, I might be able to move the needle with him. Another great tool in leadership and understanding your team a little bit more is the Strength Finders. That is a super popular test. What I love about the Strength Finders is that it's not really focused on your lack of. It really is focused on your strengths. And what are the things that you bring to the table that only you bring in your own personal and unique way? I firmly believe Abby started this conversation with, gifts and talents. I find it fascinating how God built us, that he gave us specific gifts and talents that we would bring to the world, and then it's shaped by our journey and our life experience, right? So those gifts and talents that God gave us are unique to us. So if you ever wake up in the morning, you're like, I'm not special, I'm just a cog in the world. God built us in such a special way. He gifted you with gifts and talents that are unique to you because you have grown in your world and you've walked your journey, and God has continued to develop those skills and talents in that journey, right? And so that Strength Finder test really helps you understand the strengths of your team. And when you have a difficult conversation where the needle isn't moving, the person is still kind of in that same track, you can go back to those strengths and say, hey, listen, like I see that you have these strengths in communication, or I see that you have these strengths in analysis and research. How can we utilize those strengths in your role or maybe in a different role? Right? So that you can continue to work with us and support us and help us be successful, but maybe coming from a position of your strength. And I mean, that is a powerful message to an employee, a volunteer, of saying, hey, I haven't lost faith in you. This just may not be where you're designed to be, but you have gifts and talents and strengths that we can utilize in maybe other areas of the organization. And that is so empowering. That is someone saying, I believe in the gifts and talents that you were born with, and we can utilize those in a different way. And I don't know about you, but like if my boss came to me and said that to me, I'd be like, okay, I may not be as successful in this particular area, but I know that there's other areas where I can succeed and grow and contribute and still be a part of the team. So.
Yeah. I think one of the overarching trends as we're seeing through this is as leaders, we're called to really love people, take care of people. And one of these phrases that you just gather as you go through life, I was really frustrated with a guy who I was working with at the time, and the lady who's managing me goes, "Well, Jordyn, people matter." And I tried to argue, and I'm like, "Well, yeah, they matter, but blah, blah, blah." She goes, "Stop. People matter." And it like that, it's two words, but it like totally changed the way I led. It changed the way I perceive people, my willingness to go the extra step and be like, "Hey, I want to preserve relationship because you're a person. You're not cogs. You're not a number on a spreadsheet to me. You're a person that has all these gifts, talents, abilities." And I think for me, that phrase, it was just like ringing in my head the entire time we were talking. It's just like, as leaders, like, it's not about, the end goal of making more money or seeing larger numbers in your church or whatever. It's people matter. As you lead them, as you engage with them, as you communicate with them, as you're trying to help them grow and develop them, like, turn it around. Like, you matter, people matter. So because that's true, the lens that you look at everybody through, the things we're talking about, having these difficult conversations, they matter. That's why we want to invest in them. They matter. That's why we want to open these opportunities. They matter. That's why we're giving these extended grace, these things where we're like, "Hey, we care about you. We want you to develop. We want you to grow." So however that fits in with all of this was just a thought that has just been like hanging out in my mind through this whole concept. It's like these two words, and I'm like, I get it, Lord. I hear it. It's screaming in my head. I will say it in the microphone. But yeah, you mentioned you had one last piece that I kind of stole the thunder from, but like anything, what do you want to go back for? What do you want to hit?
No, I mean, I think that was a great summary, Jordyn, in that people matter, right? Because if we go back to that equation, which I'm not a math person, but we're going to call it an equation, which was how you view yourself and how you view others and your intentions equal your behavior. If you come from it at a perspective that people matter and remember that you are a person as well, so you matter, right? If you couple that with your intentions, and your intentions, if you're a Jesus follower, your intentions are going to be based on who God is and who God calls us to be as people, as people of Jesus. If your intentions and how you see yourself and how you see others equal your behaviors will start to reflect the fact that people matter. And you'll start to care for people. And when you have these difficult conversations, they will be difficult, but they will be tempered by the fact that you want them to grow, right? And you'll deliver that message with that intent of growing and developing that person. And they will receive that feedback. Maybe it'll be difficult at first, but they will start to soften and understand that you are, in fact, trying to grow them and develop them.
Yeah. And nobody's going to be able to do this perfectly. No leader is going to be able to do this perfectly. When I think about that equation and just, I mean, when Jesus summed up all of the law, he said, love God and love people. And it sounds so simple, but it's so easy to forget that in the moment. And we're going to have difficult conversations with people, and we're going to do it wrong. We're going to lose sight of those two things, loving God and loving people, and our behavior is going to be bad, and it's going to happen. And in that, you have to have humility, and you have to be able to say, okay, I was wrong. Take responsibility for that action. And the next time around when you have that conversation, it's going to be that much easier because, well, you had grace with yourself saying, I'm wrong, and I'm going to mess up, and I'm wrong, and I'm going to do it better next time. And I don't know, as a leader, it's like, oh, this sounds so simple, but also so hard and so exhausting, but it gets easier with practice.
Absolutely. It does get easier with practice, and don't be afraid of those difficult conversations. You know, bring people into your life that have had difficult conversations. Rely on those individuals. Don't rely on yourself. Right. Mm-hmm. And I would say the last piece of advice, I always say this, either record yourself on a memo pad on your phone or record yourself on video, right? If you are having trouble with those difficult conversations, because video will tell you what your face is doing, and sometimes is it matching your heart and your words? And then also a memo recording will help you hear the intonation of your voice, and you will see how you come across to others, right? We don't see that because we hear ourselves and we're always right, and it's great, right? So those would be some very practical things you could do, is practice, video yourself, and record yourself so you can hear and listen to what you sound like, so that the message isn't lost by that.
Well, it almost gives you some accountability. There's some things that you're willing to say to somebody off record, but when that phone is recording next to you, it's like, oh, I'm really going to think about what I'm going to say before I say it. And the other thought that I had while you were talking about that is the more grace that we extend to other people and the more loving those conversations are and focused on growth, the more they're going to love and extend that growth back to us as leaders. And so that room for error just is so much better or easier to overcome, because if you show them that you care about them and their growth, they're going to care back.
Absolutely. And they're going to care for their employees or their fellow volunteers, right? Mm-hmm. It's this ripple effect. If you extend grace and people matter, they see that from you, they're going to extend it back to you, but they're also going to extend that to their colleagues and other people that they interact with. And so that is going to change the culture of your organization, of your church, whatever, but it's going to make an impact, right? When people are gracious with one another, it's going to impact the organization in a very positive way. And if you're willing to give that difficult feedback, again, that's going to permeate the organization, and it's only going to make you better.
I think to conclude our time, because we're going to have Elizabeth back and talk about all sorts of different things. But I think to conclude our time, I think this is a great reminder, leader. Be encouraged to have those tough conversations. Be encouraged to know that it's okay to stumble. Have grace with yourself because you matter.
But having those conversations sets you up for success.
Exactly.
Even when it's tough in the moment.
Totally. Any last tags? Are we feeling pretty good?
We're feeling pretty good. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you took something away. If anything, remember that people matter. And so how we speak to them really matters.
Amen to that. Thanks for hanging out with us. My name is Jordyn. This has been the Fireside Podcast. We'll see you in the next one.